Good afternoon guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name's Kris, I'm a GP from Australia, and today I'm going to be talking to you about night shift. Yeah, bit weird GP talking to you about night shift, but trust me, I did my years as a resident at the hospital. I remember night shift very, very well. So if you're interested, want some tips, want to hear my experience, stay watching. I'm just going to call out the elephant in the room. Yes, I am full glam today. I'm about to go out to a murder mystery party. So I figured while I've got my makeup on, I'll film a video or two. Let's just ignore it. So moving on, night shift. So what I'm going to talk about today is night shift here in Queensland with Queensland Health. Although I'm fairly sure that the rules Australia-wide are very, very similar. Any American watchers that I have, or European, or basically anywhere abroad, might find it quite interesting, the rules and regulations we have about night shift. So, where do we start? My night shift typically was from about 8 PM till 8 AM, however that varied a little bit, but it was typically the 12-hour shift. What I found is that doing at least 3 in a row was usually ideal. The odd night shift, singular night shift that is, on its own, was really taxing on me. And I found a lot of my colleagues felt the same way. So quite often we would want 2, 3, maybe even 4 in a row, but there was a rule that we couldn't do more than 7 in a row. If we did 7 in a row, we would then need to have 96 hours off duty to recover to avoid fatigue. Fatigue management is something that's very much pushed here in Queensland Health, and I'm sure Australia-wide as well. Although to be fair, quite often hospitals could push it, but I'm not here to bad talk anyone, this is just my experience. Legally, as an intern, resident, registrar, anyone in the hospital system, we could not work more than 12 days in a row. That includes night shift and day shift, but typically you would do a string of evenings, then a string of nights. It wouldn't be 12 night shifts in a row because obviously, like I said before, there was a limit of 7. The other piece of legislation is that you need to have at least 10 hours between shifts. It's not a lot of time really. So what would often happen is that you would work your normal shift from say, 7 AM till 6 PM, and then you could be called in as early as 4 AM the next morning. That didn't happen often, but what I would often have to do is finish my shift at 8 AM and then I'd work the next day at 8 AM. Sure, I had 24 hours in between shifts, but yeah. It's a hard one to adjust to. And we're going to get into why in a second. So we as human beings have what we call a circadian rhythm. When the sun's up, we're up. When the sun's down, we're down. There's a lot of nuance within this about melatonin and why some people have bad night's sleeps. Teenagers are different. They're quite often more nocturnal than us. Kids are a completely different species altogether, basically. But simply put, we are beings who are up during the day and down during the night. That doesn't work for night shift. So what I would do personally is basically flip everything on its head. So 8 AM became 8 PM, 6 PM became 6 AM, and you get the gist. This is obviously only how I did it. It is not necessarily the best, it's not necessarily the recommended, and it's not necessarily going to work for you, but it might. So, grain of salt. So what would often happen in the roster is that you would have a string of day shifts, so 8 till 5 PM, let's say. Then you could have a string of evening shifts, so from 4 to 10 or 11 PM, and then you would start your nights. Often there wasn't a break in between, which made it really, really hard. But sometimes you would do a day shift on the Monday and a night shift on the Tuesday. So from 5 PM till 8 PM the next day, you had basically the opportunity to try and flip your whole rhythm. So I would get home at 5 PM, obviously exhausted, have dinner, but instead of going to bed at 10 PM-ish like I normally would, I would try and extend myself and stay up as late as I could. Often I could make it to 1 or 2 AM, but not always. Sometimes, I think once I made it to 4 and that was a really big success for me. But anyway, basically stay up as late as you can. The next morning I would wake up as late as I could. Obviously it varied a lot, but basically I'd try and sleep as much as I could. I'd get up, do a couple of things, maybe have a snack or something, but I would not have my coffee. So around 4 PM I would try and go down for a nap. I sound like a child. But yes, I'd try and go down for a nap and then I'd be up again at 6 PM, which is now my 6 AM. 6 AM means breakfast and coffee, shower and get ready for work. Quite often this is the time my husband would come home, so he'd be eating dinner food and I'd be eating breakfast food, but we'd still get to see each other, which is quite nice. Then of course I'd go to work, so normally again 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. for me. I try and have lunch, and a proper lunch food situation, not a dinner food or a breakfast food, a lunch food, whatever that means, at around midnight. But mind you, night shift, oh, you just eat when you can. I'll jump into that in a little bit more detail in a second. But around this time I'd probably have my second coffee, because during the day this is normally when I'd caffeinate again, or at least back then. Now I try and caffeinate a bit earlier, but anyway. Then I'd get home around 8 or 9 a.m. depending on handover and if I had lots of jobs left, and I'd come home and have dinner. Of course, this is now 8 p.m, so I would try and shower, de-stress and everything and be in bed by about 10 a.m. Then I try and wake up at 6 p.m. and the cycle continues. Did it always work like that? No. But this is what I was aiming to do. You may have heard the term pajama day. So pajama day is when you finish at 8 a.m. that morning and are due to work at 8 a.m. the next morning. You don't technically have a day off. I mean, you've got 24 hours without work, and technically you could be called in, you know, as early as 4 p.m. that day, the 10-hour rule in between. But that day is considered your pajama day. So I would try and stay up as late as I could. Again, aiming to go to bed at 8 to 10 p.m. that night to get up at 6 a.m. the next morning. Did it always work? No. Did I try a couple of things like having different amounts of coffee at certain times to get me through? Yes. Honestly, it really depends. It depended on the rotation. I found it a lot easier in obstetrics for some reason and more difficult on general medicine. Emergency was a completely different kettle of fish because sometimes you could have a nap on there. Though I personally, I think I slept 4 times in my 2 years of doing night shifts. Yeah, something ridiculously small like that. I think there was 1 shift. Anyway, you don't need to know the details. But yes, so that is a bit of a tip that I was going to put later on, but why not now? Try not to sleep during your night shifts if you can, because you wouldn't nap during the day. That being said, if you are exhausted and you know you're not going to be needed for a couple of hours or even 20 minutes, and that is going to make you a safer doctor, then by all means, do what you need to do, okay? So what would happen on night shifts? Why are they such a difficult shift to get through? Well, not only is it an unnatural type of shift to work on as a person with a circadian rhythm, but they were quite often busy, and at least in my hospital system, you were the first port of call for a lot of people. I think I mentioned this in my general medicine rotation diaries videos, link down below obviously. But what I would do is, instead of being on a team, I'd look after everyone in the medicine wards, and that could be upwards of 100 people. So if cannulas needed replacing, if antibiotics needed to be charted, if fluids needed to be charted, if anyone had pain, fevers, if they started to seem like they were getting more unwell, I would be the person that would be called. Cannulas were the biggest pain in my butt. They're not necessarily a difficult thing, but at least in Queensland Health, and I'm fairly sure this is an Australian-wide thing, you have to replace them every 72 hours for infection control. That becomes difficult when people have been there for weeks, or need IV antibiotics, or anyway, I can rant, but I'm not going to. What would also often happen is that I would be called down to ED to help out the registrar on call with admissions. So if he knew someone needed to be admitted, he might ask me to write up all their regular medications, chart their fluids and drugs, get a bit more of a history, contact other teams for consults. So I would sort of be their lackey as well. Depending on the registrar on call though, you know, it could be quite fun. In my personal experience, the busiest times was from the start of the shift till about 1 a.m. This was when people normally were trying to get to sleep, trying to eat, would need their cannulas replaced for a last bit of antibiotics or their fluids overnight, so I was quite busy. 2 to 4 a.m. quite often wasn't so busy, and I actually planned my whole wedding between 2 and 4 a.m. over like the span of several weeks. If you want to hear that story, let me know. But yeah, basically 2 to 4 a.m. was slower, not necessarily, you know, quiet. If you're wondering why I'm hesitating to say that word, I'm about to film a video about medical superstition, so look out for that one. regardless, things would pick up again from about 4 a.m. until the team would arrive at about 7 a.m. because people would wake up, they'd be in pain, they'd need things. It was a doozy. So how do you do it? How do you do night shift? Triage is key. When you're going to call from a nurse, and of course by call I mean a page, and then you have to call them, or at least in my hospital system, a couple of things have to be asked. So who's the patient? Why do they need something? So say cannula. And when do they need it? Do they need it at 6 a.m. and it's currently 11 p.m.? It probably can go later down the list before... Sorry, my camera turned off. Apparently I've been talking for 12 minutes. So I was just saying that I would often feel guilty about changing a cannula at like 3 or 4 a.m. And I know that if I was the patient, I'd be really annoyed about being woken up to get a needle poked in. And sometimes I'd miss, so sometimes you'd poke 2 or 3 times to get the cannula in. But I also appreciate that as a practitioner, I'm doing it for the well-being of my patients, and they do need that. And I know that I would, as a patient, hopefully, I mean, I've never been in this position, but I'd hopefully also understand that as well. You're just doing your job. And most people were beautiful and very thankful that they were being seen and seen too. But I can also appreciate the therapy of a good night's sleep. So you kind of balance it up. The other thing that would quite often happen is MET calls. So I would carry the MET pager, and if you're not aware about MET calls, I have covered that previously as well. And sometimes I'd be the first responder. So that was always a very interesting experience. And by that, I mean terrifying. But it's something that I became much more blasé about towards the end. So experience is key, and just repetition, repetition, repetition. And as Dr. Mike would say, chest compressions, chest compressions, chest compressions. It's probably my dream collab, honestly. That and Mama Dr. Jones. What are we talking about? Honestly guys, when it comes down to it, find that what works for you for night shift. For me, it was flipping everything basically 180 degrees or 12 hours apart. So 8 a.m. became 8 p.m. and vice versa, and so on and so forth. You know what I'm trying to say. I would keep my meals pretty regular. I would try not to nap during my night shift, although if it works for you, it works for you. And if you want more tips about what to actually do during night shift, the ABCs of night shift, how to put in cannulas, how to triage, let me know. I'm happy to share my experience and give the tips I learned along the way. But until next time guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one. Before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, all that good YouTubey stuff, and I'll catch you later.